All right, we've gotten our hands on the official postmortem for a top-secret program, Project Genesis. We're going to zero in on the asset profile for a subject codenamed Big Ben, because what these files reveal, well, it's a masterclass in complete, catastrophic failure.
You know what? Let's just start with the final verdict, because it is just that stark. The project created an asset that was mentally unstable, physically misshapen, and completely non-viable. Operational viability assessed at a flat 0. This wasn't a mixed bag. This was an absolute failure. So the real question is, how did it all go so spectacularly wrong?
To really understand the failure, you have to understand the ambition. So let's rewind, let's go all the way back to the beginning, to the project's original mandate.
The goal was nothing less than to create a national icon, a uniquely British superhero. And the objectives were crystal clear: exceptional superhuman power, unwavering loyalty to Britain, and becoming this powerful symbol for the entire nation. I mean, these were some seriously grand goals, all fueled by this intense national pride.
But that ambition, it was built on a foundation that was fatally flawed from the get-go. And the analysis is clear on this. This disaster wasn't an accident. It wasn't a case of bad luck. Failure was a certainty, baked into the project's DNA from the very first step.
So what was that fatal first step? Well, it wasn't innovation, I can tell you that. As this slide shows, the whole idea was to replicate a previous success. Project Genesis was designed to be a direct copy of a wildly successful program called Project Zarathustra. The goal wasn't to create something new, it was to clone a past victory.
And this right here is the project's original sin. Instead of doing the hard work of original creation, the architects acted as, and I'm quoting the file, mere plagiarists. They were relying exclusively on incomplete notes from Project Zarathustra. They were essentially trying to build a god from a torn-up instruction manual.
The report itself includes this chilling line, and it just perfectly captures the hubris of it all. Woe to those who mistake a shadow for a blueprint. I mean, wow, they mistook a fuzzy echo for the real thing, and they paid a heavy, heavy price.
So here's the really crucial point. This wasn't a gamble that just didn't pay off. With a creation process that was so fundamentally broken, this catastrophic result was, and I quote, a predictable, scientifically certain outcome. Failure wasn't a possibility, it was an absolute inevitability.
So what did that inevitable failure actually look like? Well, the gap between what they wanted and what they got wasn't just wide, it was a complete, total inversion.
And this slide just lays it all out there. On one side, the intended outcome, a powerful, loyal, classic hero. On the other side, the actual result, physically misshapen, mentally unstable, and completely trapped in a delusion. They didn't just miss the target, they created its exact horrifying opposite.
That mental instability wasn't random, though. The report calls it a deeply entrenched delusional framework. And this is key. It was a necessary coping mechanism. A complete substitute reality that the asset had to build for himself, because the actual truth was just unbearable.
The official analysis concludes that this instability was a feature, not a bug, of this failed process. And why? Because, and again I'm quoting, the organism could not bear the truth of its own deformity. The delusion wasn't a malfunction, it was the only thing holding this broken creation together.
So what did this delusion actually look like day to day? Okay, first, he saw himself as a classic, handsome hero, which was in direct, profound contradiction to how he actually looked. Second, his entire life revolved around a fabricated mission, fighting these imaginary communist agents. And finally, this internal story was a complete substitute for reality, which of course made him fundamentally uncontrollable.
But the failure, it didn't even stop there. That same flawed design that created his delusion, it also contained the seeds of something much, much worse. It was the direct precondition for an uncontrolled, catastrophic transformation.
This diagram shows us exactly how it went down. The flawed creation process created this inherent vulnerability, like a crack in his psyche, and all it needed was a trigger. That trigger was an unexpected moment of what the report calls compassion, a kind of deep shared suffering, which just shattered his entire engineered reality to pieces.
The transformation basically happened in two stages. First, the trigger hits, and the lie that held him together completely collapses. But he didn't just break, he went through this bizarre kind of apotheosis.
With the delusion gone, he was able to pierce the veil of Maya, the illusion of reality, and became tragically, permanently aware of the true nature of things.
And the final outcome of this self-overcoming was that the asset, Big Ben, transformed into something new, something terrifying. The will made flesh, a being of pure, uncontrolled will, a total loss of control.
So what's the big takeaway from this monument to institutional failure? The postmortem boils it all down to 3 critical lessons. First, the final, blunt assessment of the asset's usefulness before his transformation. The official operational viability score was a big, fat 0. He was uncontrollable, unpredictable, and fundamentally useful to the people who made him.
And because he was uncontrollable, he had to be reclassified. He wasn't just a neutral failure sitting on a shelf. Oh no, he became a significant liability actively working against national security interests just by existing.
Which brings us to the 3 massive systemic failures. A failure of due diligence, because they charged ahead with incomplete data. A failure of risk assessment, because they couldn't see the inevitable consequences of what they were doing. And a total failure of objective attainment, because they created a massive liability instead of a national hero.
And this whole saga leaves us with one final, haunting question. One that goes way beyond just Project Genesis. When we get arrogant, when we try to replicate genius without truly understanding it, is catastrophe just a risk? Or is it the inevitable rule?